They locked her in a cage for being penniless, until a widowed rancher of 5 shattered the chains and... The woman in the cage. The dusty town of Dry Creek was no place for mercy. The sun scorched the ground, and the people's hearts weren't much softer. When the stagecoach rattled down the main street that morning, it passed a wooden cage set by the sheriff's office, the kind used for criminals and drunks. But the woman inside wasn't a criminal. She was just poor. Her name was Evelyn Marin, a young woman with torn gloves and eyes that once carried light. Now they only held shame. Her dress, once blue, was sun-faded and dust-caked. Her hands, bound in front of her, gripped the bars while she stared at the ground. Children whispered as they passed. Women turned away. Men spat on the dirt near her feet. Sheriff Barlow said she'd been caught stealing bread from the general store. But anyone who looked close could tell she hadn't eaten in days. Inside the saloon, a few men chuckled as they watched from the window. "Ain't right, putting a woman in a cage like that," one muttered. "Sheriff says she's been sleeping in the stables and begging from travelers," another replied. "Town's got rules." Rules. That word made Evelyn laugh bitterly when she heard it. Rules had always been written by those with full bellies. The day stretched on until evening bled across the sky. The cage threw long shadows on the ground. And that was when Thomas Braddock rode into town, a tall, broad-shouldered rancher whose horse looked almost as weary as he did. Thomas had been widowed for 4 years. His wife, Clara, had passed giving birth to their 5th child. Since then, he had carried more sorrow than a man ought to. His ranch sat miles from town, nestled in dry hills that the rain seemed to avoid. With 5 children to raise, Thomas had grown quiet and hard around the edges, a man of few words and too many burdens. But when he saw the woman in the cage, something shifted in him. He slowed his horse, frowning as he dismounted. "What's she done?" he asked a bystander. "Sheriff says she stole food," came the shrugging reply. "Said she had no home, no money. Guess he figured she'd learn her lesson sitting there." Thomas walked closer, his boots crunching the gravel. Evelyn lifted her head just enough to meet his gaze, wary, ashamed, and yet proud in a way that defied her condition. "You really steal?" he asked quietly. Her cracked lips trembled before she whispered, "I was hungry. That was all. No excuses. No plea. Just truth." He studied her for a long moment, his jaw tight. Then he turned on his heel and strode into the sheriff's office. "Barlow," he said flatly, "you planning on keeping that woman locked up through the night?" The sheriff leaned back in his chair, boots on his desk. "She broke the law, Tom. Ain't about to start making exceptions just 'cause she's got pretty eyes." Thomas's eyes narrowed. "You call starving a crime now?" "It's theft," Barlow replied with a smirk. "Can't have beggars thinking they can take what they please." Thomas took a step closer. "You ever missed a meal, Barlow?" The sheriff's hand hovered near his revolver, but Thomas didn't flinch. He'd faced storms harsher than this man. After a long pause, the sheriff huffed. "You want her that bad, pay the fine. $20. "That's robbery," Thomas muttered. "Law's the law," Barlow said, echoing the cruelty of small men everywhere. Thomas dropped the money on the desk, every coin he had on him. "She's coming with me." When he returned to the cage, he didn't speak. He just reached down, unlatched the lock, and swung the door open. Evelyn blinked in disbelief, then stumbled to her feet, clutching the bars. "Why?" she whispered. He offered his hand. "Because nobody deserves chains for being hungry." She hesitated, then took his hand. Her skin was cold, her grip light as wind. The townsfolk watched as he helped her onto his horse. Whispers followed them as they rode out, the rancher and the beggar woman. But Thomas didn't care. He'd lost the habit of caring what others thought long ago. The trail home stretched beneath the moon. Evelyn swayed in the saddle, exhaustion claiming her. Thomas steadied her without a word. The only sounds were the creak of leather and the distant cry of coyotes. When they reached his ranch, 5 small faces peered from the porch, curious and cautious. "Who's that, Pa?" asked the oldest, a boy of about 10. Thomas glanced at Evelyn, then back at his children. "Someone who needs a warm meal," he said simply. And that night, for the first time in months, the house on Braddock Ranch glowed with more than lamplight. It glowed with something almost forgotten: mercy. The chains within. The first light of morning stretched across Braddock Ranch, spilling over the fences, the wheat fields, and the quiet little house that had become Evelyn's refuge. She stood by the kitchen window, watching Thomas's children chase each other through the yard. Their laughter was soft, golden, and unfamiliar to her ears, a sound she'd almost forgotten existed. Each day felt like learning how to breathe again. When Thomas had brought her home from that wretched cage, she hadn't expected kindness to last. Men, in her life, had offered help only to take something in return. But Thomas Braddock was different, rough, steady, and silent, like the land itself. He didn't ask questions. He didn't demand gratitude. He simply gave her space to heal. The children, too, had become her light. Little Annie often followed her around, holding onto her apron, asking endless questions. Ben and Luke, the older boys, were cautious at first, protective of their father's memory of their late mother, but soon they began leaving their muddy boots by the door without being told, and Evelyn noticed that small change meant everything. One evening, as she tucked the girls into bed, Sarah asked, "Miss Evelyn, are you going to stay here forever?" Evelyn paused, her throat tightening. "I don't know, sweetheart." Sarah smiled sleepily. "I hope you do. Pa smiles more when you're here." Evelyn's heart ached with something sweet and painful at once. Weeks passed, and the peace of the ranch became her world. The smell of coffee in the mornings, the rhythm of the windmill, the soft sound of Thomas's boots on the porch, they became part of her heartbeat. Still, Dry Creek was not kind to those who defied its rules. When Evelyn rode into town for supplies, whispers followed her like a shadow. "That's the woman who was in the cage. Thief, isn't she? Living with the widower, I heard." She ignored them as best she could, but the sting of their judgment never faded. When she returned that afternoon, Thomas was chopping wood by the barn. He looked up and saw the hurt in her eyes before she spoke. "Don't listen to them," he said quietly. She hesitated, clutching her shawl. "It's hard not to, Tom. They think I don't belong here." He straightened, wiping sweat from his brow. "You belong where you're wanted. And you're wanted here." The words hit her deeper than he could have known. That night, when the house was quiet, Evelyn sat by the fire sewing a torn shirt. Thomas came in, shoulders heavy from the day's work. For a long while, neither spoke. Then, in a voice low and certain, he said, "I don't care what the town thinks. You're not a burden here. You're part of this home." Evelyn looked up, eyes shimmering. "You've given me more kindness than I've ever known. I don't know how to repay it." "Just stay," he said simply. For a time, it seemed peace might last. But peace is fragile, and Evelyn's past was not ready to die. One hot afternoon, while she was hanging laundry, a shadow crossed the yard. A man on horseback watched from the hill, broad, dark, and familiar in a way that made her blood run cold. She knew that silhouette. She'd seen it in her nightmares. Jacob, her husband, the man she'd fled from, the man whose cruelty had driven her to hunger and despair. He rode closer, a smirk twisting his scarred face. "You thought you could run from me, Eve," he sneered. Thomas came out from the barn, jaw tight, eyes cold. "You've got no business here." Jacob laughed harshly. "That woman's mine. Married under God and law. You can't just steal another man's wife." Evelyn shook her head, trembling. "You lost that right when you raised your hand to me." Jacob's smirk faded. He spat into the dirt. "You think this rancher can keep you? He can't even keep his own woman alive." The words hit like a slap. Thomas's eyes flared, but he didn't move, not yet. "Leave," he said, voice like thunder. Jacob leaned forward in his saddle. "I'll be back. And when I come, I'm taking her." He turned his horse and rode off, dust curling behind him. Evelyn sank to her knees, shaking. Thomas knelt beside her, his large hand steady on her shoulder. "I'll keep you safe," he said quietly. But that night, neither of them slept. The storm came 2 days later. Rain hammered the roof, lightning tore the sky, and the wind howled like something alive. Thomas sat by the door, rifle across his lap. Evelyn paced the floor, arms wrapped around herself. The knock came just past midnight, loud, heavy, demanding. Thomas rose slowly and opened the door. Jacob stood there, soaked, wild-eyed, gun in hand. "I warned you," Jacob hissed. "She's mine," Evelyn cried out. "Jacob, please." But before the word finished, he raised the pistol. Thomas fired first. The gunshot echoed through the storm. Jacob staggered, clutching his shoulder, and fell to the porch. For a moment, all was silent except the rain. Evelyn rushed forward, trembling. "Tom." He lowered the rifle, breathing hard. "He's alive. But he won't hurt you again." They brought the children into the room, calming them through their tears. Thomas sent a rider to town for the sheriff, and by morning Jacob was gone, carried off in shackles, cursing through bloodied lips. When the sheriff left, Thomas stood in the doorway, drenched, exhausted. Evelyn went to him slowly, her hands trembling as she touched his arm. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "You didn't deserve this trouble." He shook his head. "You didn't deserve any of it." She looked up at him, eyes shining. "Why did you risk everything for me?" His answer came without hesitation. "Because no one should fight alone." The days that followed were quieter. The town, once eager to gossip, now spoke in hushed tones. Word spread of how the widowed rancher defended the woman they'd mocked, how he faced down her tormentor with nothing but courage and decency. Evelyn found herself walking the fields again, her steps lighter, her heart freer. When she looked at Thomas, she no longer saw just the man who saved her, she saw the man who believed she was worth saving. One evening, after supper, he found her by the fence watching the sunset. The sky burned gold and violet. "Kids are asleep," he said softly. She smiled faintly. "They trust me now. Even Ben asked me to read him a story tonight." Thomas chuckled. "He doesn't even let me near his books." They stood side by side for a long moment, the silence gentle between them. Finally, Evelyn spoke. "I never thought I'd find peace again. Not after everything." He turned to her. "Peace doesn't just find us. We make it, one day, one choice at a time." Her eyes met his. "And what about love?" He hesitated, the corner of his mouth lifting. "That too." The space between them vanished. His hand brushed her cheek, rough but tender. She leaned into his touch, and for the first time, she didn't flinch. When he kissed her, it was slow, certain, and full of everything words could never say: gratitude, grief, hope. The cage that once held her was gone. The chains that bound her heart were dust. When they finally pulled apart, Evelyn whispered, "You broke the chains, Tom." He smiled, voice low. "No. You did. I just gave you the key." And as the stars spread across the wide western sky, the ranch that had once been silent filled again, with laughter, with healing, and with the quiet strength of love that had been earned, not given.